plus also the taping of it. So I just want to set that context there. So I really appreciate you guys, after a long weekend, kicking this off with it. So, so first thing I'd like to do is direct our attention over to the board. I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds to read through those norms. So as we dive into this data analysis work today, especially since I don't know you three don't know me, and then all of us together, what are, based off of those norms that you just saw, is there anyone in particular that resonates with you of something that our group is going to need to pay particular attention to, or one that you yourself might need to be particularly aware of?
Since we do have an outside perspective, I think it's going to be important to actively seek, accept, and give feedback, because you are going to bring new learners to us today.
Okay, thanks, Kelsey. It's Kelsey, right?
Yes.
Okay.
For me, it would be take ownership of results and learning for self and others. Because in order to grow, I have to learn and take ownership of what I'm not good at, so. Or what needs to be taught better with the kids based off the results.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts?
Just kind of what Kelsey said about actively seeking, accepting, and giving feedback, and then be willing to internalize that feedback for change and growth.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just jump in, I think one for me is that first one of new learnings, modifying prior assumptions, just because I'm learning, we're all learning, and I think we can learn a lot from Teresa.
Well, I'm excited for this. Thank you for walking through those norms. And the reason we unpack those norms is so that you get a chance to really ground yourself in it versus just looking at a set of norms that are sitting up on a wall. So I would ask that we all push one another in these areas. I'm sure you all have done a lot of work together where you've pushed each other and known the benefits for kids that comes from it. So any places, and that means pushing me as well. And again, as we go through this, I'll be unpacking things quite a bit, which might seem elementary in some cases, and maybe so you'll have to understand it's only coming from a place of a learning versus assuming that you don't know something. So, all right, and I'd like to kick off that I think all of you have already started the first two. Katie said the second grade was the perfect team to come in and do this with, and that you all were just so readily excited to do that. So I'm excited for this. All right, what I'd first like to kick us off to do is, if everybody would take a moment and pull up pull up the screenshot that shows your student names with the answers and standards that are coded with each question for the assessment at the very top of the page. And you all have that? Okay, great. All right, so who would like to start first on just some general takeaways, or anybody want to start first with just a piece of something that they analyzed in the data?
We had a lot of trouble with 3D shapes.
Yeah.
A lot of what I have been doing is just being like, well, we had snow days, and I mean, we didn't get to teach a lot of the material that was tested because of the snow days. But just really owning that, and over the past week or so, we've been really putting it back into our reteach block and actually teaching it for the first time.
Yep. So thank you for kicking off with that. Okay, so we have Kelsey, Tarnisha, remind me your name?
Lauren.
Lauren, okay. Lauren, all right. So Lauren just gave a perfect example of what's called deficiency-based feedback. We always, high performers typically, go first to the area that didn't go well. And you highlighted that perfectly. So what I want to do is push you three, who I imagine are always readily aware of where your gaps are. I'd like you each first to take a look at your data, and it can be just yours, or if you have all of yours in front of you. What are the highlights in this data? What are the highlights, and what made you as the teacher successful?
I'm not on the district view or the campus
That's
view.
fine, you can just go off of
yeah.
yours. That's fine.
My kids really struggled with, at the very beginning when I first introduced time to the 5-minute mark, my kids really struggled with that. And that being said, when they took their CFA, we got a class average of 91%, and I think that's because I really kept track of who was struggling, and so during my reteach block, I would set them up with a peer tutor and give them the clocks to manipulate, and they would like work on time for that 20-30 minute period every day until they had proven to me they mastered it.
So you setting them up with a peer tutor is what you
Yeah.
think was the
Yeah, the
action
most
that made,
effective. Yeah.
okay. Thank you, Kelsey. Lauren or Tanisha, anything, highlights of this data?
What
I
was
could just-
2.12C?
Yeah, I'm on my analysis, problem solving strategies.
I'm very
Not sure what
proud.
question it was.
Every single one of my scholars got that answer correct. Every single one.
Do you know what question that was related to?
Mine 2.7 C at 98%.
I don't know. What
So
question
it
was
was
only
look for
one that I
2.7C, question 28. Oh, that, yeah. That was question 28?
No, that's not aligned to
Okay.
the questions.
Oh,
That's
okay.
just,
How many questions there were, I think.
No.
That may be possible.
this is just random numbering.
Yeah.
So Lauren, yours, you're celebrating which standard,
2.12C,
Okay.
which involves problem solving.
okay,
And every single scholar, even mine who don't speak English, got that right. So
Okay.
that made me really proud.
great. Do you know what you did in the class that made those scholars achieve that?
I mean, we focus a lot, like a lot of our do nows are focused around problem solving, and a lot of just every problem kind of focuses on that skill that we do in math. So just a lot of practice, a lot of practicing again.
Okay. And do we know the question that is tied to that?
That's
We're
what I just
supposed
figured.
to.
Standard? Okay.
I don't
Let me see if it is.
question analysis.
So,
I
I
think
mean,
it
there
was
are numbers
questions
on the
9 and 10.
top, but I don't know if that's
I just went
actually-
ahead and counted, and I think it was questions 9 and 10. And that was asking them to draw a picture that represented an addition story, and then they had to write their answer with units. And then there's another one where they had to problem solve a pattern. That was an additive part too.
okay, so let me bring all of us back. So, for a moment, do each of you have a copy of the test in front of you?
Yes.
Do you have a copy of it? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and go to that question. So do we have, and I can share with you, Felicia, I've got a hard copy here. I'm gonna just capture some notes while we're here. Okay, and so Lauren, what question number are we looking at and that was,
It's number 10
okay,
and 6 and 10.
so
6, 9, and 10.
6, 9, and 10, so 2.12C, 6, 9, and 10. All right, so let's all take a moment and, Lauren, I'm gonna have you lead the show on this one. If you'll take a look at number 6. And Lauren, will you tell us, based on either 6, 9, or 10, if the specific action that you did in your class helped your students achieve that 100%? Based off of question 6, 9, or 10.
Well, the question was taking, sorry, I'm still pulling it up.
No, you're fine.
The question was given a story problem, and the scholars had to first read the story problem themselves and then take out the important information. And then they had to pick the number model that was appropriate to use or not to use, and then solve the problem using a picture.
And this is what you did in your class?
Yes, we
Okay.
did it a lot.
And by a lot, you said in your do nows?
And our do nows, and then we did direct teaching on it for like a week using the understand, plan, solve, and check
Okay.
format. And just really being able to have the time to explicitly teach something and then reteach it over and over again.
Okay.
Instead of just the time to be able to teach them something like that is why they did well.
Okay. So I'm hearing a pattern already between Kelsey and Lauren that this repetitive practice is probably one of these strategies that has accounted for some success on this. All right, Tarnisha, what about with you? What was something, and I'm going to go ahead and ask all of us as a norm, while each one of us is sharing, if we go ahead and tend to our computers, and we'll, that way we can capture the information from each person that's sharing. So, Tanisha, I'm gonna go ahead and, if you'll share us something positive, a highlight, and something that I think made you successful in this.
One of my highlights was 2.7C. The class average was a 98%. I'm trying to see what teak that is.
So 2.7C, which is interesting
That's shapes.
because,
Cut two-dimensional geometric figures apart and identify the new geometric figure formed.
98% of my scholars got that question right.
okay, so, if you want to, let's take a look at the questions and see which question that aligns to. It looks like question number 30 in the test, and that looks like the only one.
And 31. 30 and 31.
Okay. All right, perfect. So, all right, so do you guys want to take a look and see on the test, numbers 30 and 31, and Tanisha, can you tell us what you actively did in your class to?
This was more of such hands-on. If you can fold them equally, then that connect, like the connected the connected lines with the figures, that shows the class that it's congruent, or the figures will be formed.
Okay, so what was something that you did with your students to get that 98%?
Honestly, I'm not sure, because I just teach by I taught by the lesson plan and made sure that they were grasping it, and by the grace of God, honestly, they got it. I really
Not
don't
sure
know.
specifically. Okay. Have you two had that experience with this particular teak?
This wasn't explicitly taught this past unit or 2 units.
I think there was a
I thought
lesson
it-
on
yeah.
it, but it was
It
one that
wasn't
got offset.
explicitly taught though. I don't think.
So, did any of you explicitly teach it? It sounds like you explicitly
I
taught
did,
it,
I
Tanisha,
did,
and
I
you
did.
did, and Lauren didn't. Okay, so, so then, and you taught it. Do you remember what any specific actions, and how did y'all's students do on that particular 30 and 31, the standards?
The unit had a lot to do with more hands-on, of the kids cutting out things and putting the shapes together and things of that nature. So I think it was more of the hands-on activity that they grasped and understood of of how to do it.
Okay.
Just to give some context, these shape lessons were during this, during the ice storm, and so I think that's why we might have some, we might be
Very-
offset
yeah,
between classes.
Absolutely.
Basically, I had them like fold some shapes to see how they would be the same, or like to demonstrate lines of symmetry, but then it's like that hands-on guided practice, and then I released them to an independent worksheet that was created, that just like had the lines of symmetry already drawn, and they had to identify what new shapes, or not even lines of symmetry, but once you cut them
What
with
other
a line,
shapes
what
would
new
form.
shapes would be
Yeah.
formed.
Great. So what I'm hearing is a very, very intentional balance, even though Tanisha might be feeling it's not intentional on our part. Everything our students do is intentional on our part, so you absolutely did something in there that drove those results. So 98% is a very, really high number. So it sounds like there's this great balance of hands-on and then tying it directly to what these problems look like on paper. Because I think there are extreme situations where some teachers go very hands-on and don't tie into what this looks like in an actual problem, or they just do the rote paperwork and don't give them the hands-on piece. So it sounds like there was a smart balance between the two that effectively enabled your students to use the hands-on piece, but then they would tie it into the problems. Okay, all right, so lots of high numbers in here, lots of high scores on some tough standards. So now let's take a moment and where should we dive in when we're thinking about
We know why that happened.
Yeah, that's true.
So here's what I'd like you guys to think about. When you are thinking about what standard to dive into first, when Lauren was the first one to speak and mentioned the particular standard that her students struggled with the most, what made you pick that particular standard?
Because we got a 59% on it.
So you're basing it exclusively off of student mastery or lack thereof?
Yeah.
So do you all work much with readiness and supporting standards? Do you all do a lot of work with that?
Can you define what that is?
Yes. So the state of Texas takes all the TEKS and defines them, and they are typically used by the test-taking grade levels, so grades 3 and above. And they're called readiness and supporting standards.
So the STAR.
Exactly. So your standards are defined readiness if they show up on the STAR test and they're tested frequently, and that they are a TEK that you need to move to the next grade level. And a supporting standard is by nature what it's defined as. They're tested much less often on the STAR test. They're tested infrequently, but they're also building blocks sometimes to help you with the readiness standards.
We've not looked at this.
Okay, I ask you this, go
Can I
ahead.
ask a question?
Sure.
We use vocabulary prioritized and non-prioritized TEKS. Okay.
Yes, exact same idea. And where did that set of prioritized and non-prioritized come from?
Scope and sequence.
Your scope and sequence, so through Uplift. So do we know, Katie, if those have been mapped to readiness and supporting?
I don't believe that, I'm sure that they have a tie. I'm sure
Okay.
it's an intentional.
I know how they build it is they emphasize different TEKs at different grade levels to make sure that they are prioritized at some point. So maybe, like for example, last year shapes were not prioritized TEKs. They weren't really, I mean, there was like 2 days to go over all 2D and 3D shapes, and it wasn't a prioritized part of the unit. It was just, hey, if you have time, do this. But ideally, that's because in first grade it was a prioritized TEK.
Got it.
And for example, in first grade, coins are not prioritized, but in second grade, I
They
believe
are.
money
Yes.
is
Yes.
prioritized.
Okay, great. It showed up on
They
this
go
test.
back and forth.
Right, okay, great. So the reason I asked this to you is because when you have some decisions to make for your reteach, what decisions do you make when you guys are deciding what to reteach and what not to reteach? What are some decisions? So the first thing I heard is you select the standard to talk about that has the lowest level of mastery. Then how do you determine whole class reteach?
Based on need, once a month we all put together our own classes formal reteach plan. And on that reteach plan, we look at either our CFA data or we look at our unit assessment, and we determine which of our kids are really struggling with this TEK or that TEK or that concept.
Okay,
And then
so it's all individualized.
it's individualized.
Okay, what about whole class?
But if, say like, for example, I'm looking at this,
Mhm.
and we did it for CFA for reteach, I would know that this is a whole class reteach on this particular TEK because of the highlights of the percentage of the number of scholars that missed that one.
So do you have
So
a,
general rule is under 80% is, like small, or like pull kids or pull small groups. Under
Okay.
70% definitely pull small groups.
And then
And
under
there's
60,
yeah.
or between, no, under 70 is whole group reteach.
great. So for intent purposes of today, let's talk whole group reteach to kick off. And we're talking 70% as a whole group for your class, okay? Now, I went through and took the liberty of looking at your classes actually as a whole group, but you should be looking at yours individually. But if the whole group numbers are less than 70%, my hunch is your individual classes are less than 70% mastery. So I'm going to give you a moment. If you had to select, and I already did some legwork for you guys, which you would not have done this, but I went in and already identified which one of your standards were supporting and which one of your standards are readiness. And how I did that is I didn't look at prioritized and non-prioritized according to your scope and sequence. I actually took the third grade STAR, and then I took the third grade set of TEKs and said, based off of this, which standards in second grade most closely relate to the readiness and supporting for second grade. Because so many students who move to the third grade struggle because teachers in second grade have not prioritized the TEKs that they need to know to be successful in the third grade. The same said for third grade moving to fourth. It's not just a second to third grade thing. This is every grade level.
Does Julie do that? Does she align with them?
My hunch is the prioritized and non-prioritized probably have a link to the supporting. But for this intent purposes of today, here's what I'd like us to take a look at. I'd like you to take just a moment and identify, if you were to pick at a threshold of 70% mastery or less, what would be the first prioritized TEK that each of you, so if each of you will pick yours, I'll give you a chance to share out. Everybody have theirs? And then be prepared to give your evidence why. Kelsey, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, mine would be 2.7a, which is describing attributes of 3D shapes. Class mastery was at a 60%. This was my lowest TEK.
Okay.
And I know that explicit instruction on this was a little bit sparse, and like chopped apart by the ICE days.
Okay, so 2.7A, who else had 2.7A?
Yeah.
Okay, all four of us did, great. All right, so 2.7A. 2.7A is a readiness standard in third grade. If your kids aren't nailing it in second,
Yeah.
it's gonna kill them in third.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing to know. So when you have to decide a reteach standard for your entire class, you wanna not just look at lowest mastery. That is absolutely a priority, lowest mastery. You also wanna prioritize it and make sure it is your highest priority to reteach. Okay, so that means if you don't have time to get in all of the reteach with a whole group, you have to make absolute certain that those readiness standards, which I'm assuming these are coded your priority teams. All right, so let's take a look then at 2.7A and who can read aloud. I have the copy of the second grade standards in front of me, but who can read aloud? Great. Can you tell us what 2.7A reads?
Describe attributes, the number of vertices, faces, edges, and sides of 2- and 3-dimensional geometric figures such as circles, polygons, spheres, cones, cylinders, prisms, and pyramids, etc.
Okay, great. All right, so what I'd like you to do is, how many questions on 2.7A were on this CFA? Any ideas?
I think there were 3.
I see 2 right now. It was 26 and 27.
26 and 27. Okay.
20.
But then it also, well,
2.7B was 28 and 29.
right.
Okay. And 28, right? I think I see the 28
Yeah.
sneaking in there too.
22.
Okay.
It's 27 and
28.
All right. So when you take a look at this, what I want you guys to do is think about, do you think your students struggled because this was, actually I'm going to just have you take a look at question number 26. Everybody take a look at number 26. I'll share with you. No, you're fine. All right, first question. What misunderstandings are revealed in this data? Let's take a look at the question. And then I want you to go ahead and take a look at your data that shows what your students answered. So go ahead and pull up that report.
A lot of them answered A and D. A and D were my main mistakes. So they said that it looked like a cube and it looks like the cylinder. Or the, so for the ones who answered D, they don't understand what a face is. For the
Okay.
ones that answered A, they understand what a face is, but they miscounted the triangle prism. They had a counting issue.
I think A is the correct answer. A is the correct answer.
Oh no. For 2, oh.
Yep.
I was looking at the wrong
20.
one, sorry.
Yeah.
That's right, 26. So we're,
C was the main misconception.
that's
Mine
what
too.
was too.
okay, so all three of you, you're just making this easier on yourself. Great. So C is the issue, and I'd like to hear from Tarnisha. Letter C, why do you think your students?
Well, when it says triangular prism, they're thinking of a triangle, but you have to actually read the question to see what it says.
Okay.
To get a grasp of understanding.
Any additional, Lauren, Kelsey?
I think when I was like looking at my CFAs, it seemed like we had explicitly taught what a face was, but we hadn't gone through like a process of how to count it on paper. Like we counted it hands-on, but it's like really easy to not count correctly. And so like my kids who did go through and like cross off each face as they counted generally got this question correct, but those who didn't were just, it was like miscounting. They didn't have a process to go through this question with.
Okay,
I don't,
makes sense.
it's kind of like what you said. I think my kids just don't read the directions. They're like, okay,
They
that,
saw
that
triangle
looks like
and
a triangle,
zeroed
that
in
looks
on
like a triangle. They look like they're the same, and they'll
Yep.
just answer what they think is right. They
Okay,
don't
yep.
actually read
Take the time
the
to-
question.
So, now I'm assuming, and based on what you said earlier, Lauren, I imagine that you all have already started to, intervene with this particular standard. But for the intent and purposes of this data meeting, which first time that I'm looking at this data with all of you, what, then based off of this, what are some things that you know that you have to absolutely do then to reteach this particular standard? What are some things that you have to keep in mind and absolutely demand in terms of a reteach plan?
One thing you have to emphasize the importance of reading the
Yes.
question.
That was my
Okay.
And then
answer.
figuring
Yes.
out
Yes.
what you're actually looking for.
So the first thing I want everyone to do is capture a pen, grab a pen in front of them and a piece of paper, or if you have your form in front of you, your reteach plan page, if you have this page as well in front of you, make sure, and again, I don't, you might have captured this, but I'd like everybody to capture. Point number one is ensuring what? Lauren, would you repeat that for the group?
that scholars are actually reading the question and understand what they're asking.
Okay, so what are some ways that we can do that, and Sharon, what are some ways? Kelsey, it didn't sound like that came up as the issue for your students. In fact, you talked about some of yours counting the side. So what have you taught your students to do to ensure they read the directions?
I always, before we have a big exam coming up, I always go back to our goals and I stress the importance of like test taking strategies. So focusing when you're taking the test, making sure you actually thoroughly before you go to the answer choices.
Okay,
Um,
so one way to ensure then this, so everybody should be capturing test-taking strategies, right? We know that that's a quick way right before the test to review test-taking strategies. All right, Kelsey, anything else you wanted to add?
as far as that, like
Literally reading the directions?
Yeah,
That's your big one?
Yeah.
Okay. Tarnisha and Lauren, do those sound like a quick review right before your test and just reminding them about the test-taking strategies, influencing them on their goal? Does that sound like something that might work and might help?
Definitely. I wasn't here during
Okay.
a lot of the CNAs, so.
One of the things.
So you'll know that that's something that you'll want to
That's
just push
okay.
on, absolutely.
One of the things that, I'm sorry.
Tarnisha, I'm so sorry, I want to bring back to Lauren's point really fast. We will all have emergencies, right? There'll all be days when we're out, there will be days. So what is something, Lauren, that you might do if you're out at the next CFA? Or if you, Lauren, or Kelsey, or Tarnisha, if any of us are out on those days, your students still have to be able to do this in spite of us being there. So what is a thought that we have?
Something that I wish I would have done is just, because we have emergency sub-plans and stuff like that, is just one, either include something like that in the sub-plan to just remind them about strategies for taking a test, what's important for us to do, but also to reach out to teammates and just be like, hey, would you mind stepping
Popping
in and
in,
just
perfect.
talking to them?
Girl, I want to give a high five. I know you're sick and it's worth it. High five. See you sneezing over there. It's
Allergies.
yeah. Okay, then, guys, that is awesome. Exactly. Like you guys, in spite of it, the CFA for second grade at Infinity, no matter what, must live on, even if we don't. So I love that idea, Lauren. So reaching out and covering one another's bases when we're out for that. Tarnisha, you wanted to add something.
My thing was that I need to just continue to reiterate the importance of taking your time to actually read the question and not rushing through it, because the question has keywords and key details that you need to point out. And one of the things I had them highlight or underline, what are the key details of the question, so they can pop out to understand exactly what the question is asking.
You've had them doing that after this?
Yes, during the reteach.
Great. So, did you guys capture that, underlining keywords or highlighting them? That's another great way to make sure that, which also goes in, that you have to teach them which words are your keywords.
Yes.
So, absolutely. All right. So let's dive in. What else? What are some other gap misunderstandings in this data? So where else did we hit?
I think what the trends I was seeing in my class, they do really well with manipulatives. If they could count faces really well with manipulatives, but just giving them that process on paper, that some of my students had carried forward from first grade of crossing out, that we didn't really have time to touch upon in class. So I've done some reteach in just calendar math where I draw a shape, 3D shape on the board and have them cross out as they count faces.
Okay, great. So it sounds like the hands-on work and then teaching them how to transfer that to the paperwork. Okay, so you guys should all capture that as another strategy for this particular shape issue, since we've got 59% of our students as a whole, I think Kelsey, you mentioned 59% of your students hitting mastery on this, that another strategy then is literally taking them and transferring the skills from the hands-on to the on-paper. But you also added a piece in there that I think is really important that I heard. During calendar, how often is calendar done?
Every day.
Every day. So this habit-forming piece, so instead of talking to second graders about what they should be doing, we should always be having them do it every single day. All right. Okay. Is there anything else we want to dive into specifically on how we're going to help students achieve mastery on this particular question? Let's check the other two questions and make sure there's not a part of this standard against these questions that we're missing, that the 2 or 3 strategies we just talked about. Lauren, is there anything that you wanted to add in particular on this, based on anything that you've tried or?
Well, what I had my scholars do is when we were counting faces or vertices or sides or anything like that, we would mark it on the board as we're going, which I still find confusing. But it's better than, just practicing it with a manipulative, because they won't always have a
Right.
manipulative. So like we would put in a line on it in a
Yep.
different color just to show that we've counted it already.
Great, so, and then did they do that on
They
their?
did it on their test.
And you actually saw them do it. Did you
I mean-
happen to find any relationship between the students who got it right that did do it and the ones that didn't?
We did overall pretty well on that question.
Okay,
It was more the next question that was just like, don't know what just happened.
Yeah.
Were you sleeping? I think you might have been asleep. But I think a lot of it is a lot of them got that question right.
got
I only
26 right.
I only had 4 who missed it.
So Lauren, based off of 26, what success on 26 could be applied to question 27 for your scholars? If,
Well, clearly it shows that they know how to count faces.
okay,
The main thing that they missed on 27 was the bases question.
okay,
And I actually think that's because I clearly don't understand what a base is. So
Okay.
when I was explaining it to them, I guess I misspoke to them.
Lauren, I'd like to stop for a moment and recognize that you are extending yourself and your trust. You're also being courageous. I really appreciate you standing. How many years have you taught?
This is my second.
Okay, that's, I really appreciate you sharing openly that you might be confused with bases.
They just seem like faces to me, but apparently there's a difference.
And they sound the same, there's so many
Right.
things wrong with
And,
bases
like,
and bases.
Faces are faces,
Yes.
but faces are not
Not
bases.
bases.
Yeah.
Okay, so whose
That's
kids,
confusing.
whose scholars did do well on this? Okay, so Kelsey says no, Tarnisha's backing up.
Yeah.
All right, do we have a math expert at Infinity?
No.
Do we have anyone in primary, middle, or high?
Do we have some middle school?
Yeah.
We have
math
some middle
experts.
school math experts. Okay, so everybody, I want you to capture on your notes, and then Katie, as your leader, would be the one. We got to make a connection with this math expert to make sure to come in and teach you three this concept,
Yeah.
so that you guys can unpack it well enough for your students. Because all of us have college degrees in this room, and if bases are confusing to us,
Yeah.
our second graders are definitely going to struggle with it. And because this is a high priority TEAG, and they will struggle with this until they are Lauren's age and my age, unless we nail this. So absolutely super important that we do whatever it takes to understand bases, and that might mean starting with us. Well, it clearly means. So then you want to put a star next to that, because once you understand what it means, then you can use your instructional strategy expertise to determine what you need to do to reteach this. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Your data meeting ends at 8:55, right? Okay, so it's 8:45. I'm gonna stop us here, because I want to do, Flo will continue to capture this, but we're gonna do kind of a debrief and a follow-up on, so I wanna first have each of you share out one action step or strategy that you plan to implement back in the classroom based on this data conversation that we've just had. So the priority TEAG that we focused on was 2.7A, which has to do with shapes. So Kelsey, would you like to, will you share out one of those strategies?
I really think what we just talked about, like reaching out to someone to get clear on what a base is, because that wasn't in the lesson plan, and even as a district, when we discussed this question, we didn't even come to a clear definition on what it was.
Yep.
So I think it's gonna be like immediate action step, reaching out to Rose or reaching out to Ben to say like, can you tell me what a base
Great.
is and how it differs from a face?
So who's gonna own that action step? Lauren, great. Lauren, when can you realistically get to one of those folks and have a report back out to the group?
I'll send them an email about it tomorrow, and hopefully or today, so hopefully we can meet about it today or
Great.
tomorrow before school or something.
Great, so let's capture by January 22nd, second grade team is gonna know what a base is. All right, awesome. Okay, what's another strategy or action step that we talked about, Lauren?
Just reiterating test-taking strategies, considering, today my kids are taking the MAP test, so just something else
Great.
that's gonna be helpful to them.
Great.
And also something, just giving them an incentive
So connecting it to that goal, I love the combination of the test taking strategy as it relates to them achieving a goal. Awesome, okay? And in particular, what test taking strategy that you would want to talk about or push on?
The main thing is just taking your time and really making sure that you read the question and then you paraphrase the question to make sure that you understand what it's asking.
Great, so let me ask you all this. So when I ask Tarnisha, when I say take your time as a student, what does that mean to you?
Don't rush. Make sure
Okay.
that you're completely focusing on each question and answer it to the best of your knowledge.
Okay, what does that mean to you, take your time?
That's something that I don't think they understand what that means. So what I'm having to do is I'm like, okay, you read the question. Maybe you read it a second or a third time to make sure that you really understand what it's asking. Say it again in your head in different words, and then answer the question.
Okay. Kelsey?
Yeah, like think critically about each question. So one, read the question, think about what it's asking. Two, think about what problem solving strategies you need. And then three, read each answer choice thoroughly, eliminate the ones that don't make sense, and then narrow between the two best.
The less language you can use with your students, the better. These 3-step, like read twice, like giving them a ton of choice on what to do on a question that they already struggle with, they're going to take the easier way out because they're feeling frustrated and insecure about it. So if you can teach them that when I say take your time, what that means are 3 things. Read twice, underline keywords, and write down exactly what this is telling me. So I would really push you that when you're telling them to take their time and giving these test-taking strategies, also unpack for them exactly what that means. All right, Tarnisha, what's a final instruction or a strategy that we talked about today?
Honestly, I would just piggyback on both of them. In order for me to be able to teach my kids effectively, I have to understand what I'm teaching. So the knowledge about getting the information from the expert. And then the strategy is most important because these are things that they're going to need for a lifetime of test-taking strategy. So if we teach it now, then it can go on for them for a lifetime.
Okay, all right, great. And then, so it sounds like all of you are gonna do the reminding of these test-taking strategies this week during MAP. So we'll continue to do that and practice that. Excellent. All right, so we got through, I wanna take a moment and debrief this exercise and this experience. So we got through how many TEKs? 1. Okay, so tell me your thoughts around that.
It takes a long time to really do a thorough job with data.
Okay, what are some other thoughts?
I think Lauren really hit it on the head, like you really need to invest the time. But I think like not only it took so much time because we actually went back to the questions and broke down where the misconceptions were happening.
Yes.
And so I think that whole process is really important moving forward because if you're not actually diagnosing where the conceptual breakdown is, you're not going to effectively teach.
Right. And even though it was one question, we each shared out different strategies and different ways that we did it. So we're able to understand or gain some knowledge from each other based off what we need to do to help with that particular TEK and getting that score up for ourselves.
Great. So a couple of pieces of information that I want to help draw your conclusions to. Number 1, do you see the value and importance of choosing the highest priority TEK to talk about? So you might, with the smartest 2nd grade team in this room, you guys may only have time to talk about 3 TEKs. And if you are picking one that has one question on, say, next year's STAR test, or even this year's ability for them to build some foundational skills, if you're spending your time on a low level or low impact TEK and you spent this much time on it, so it's so important that you're gonna even only maybe sometimes get through 3 and 4 TEKs in a data meeting. But if you know that this particular one on the 3rd grade STAR test takes up 30% of the STAR test. So if your kids master this one, they've already at 30%, and that's when we're getting them into mastery. Our goals as Uplift is that we want 100% of our kids to get 80% or better on the test, not just to pass it. So in order for them to get true mastery, they have to be able to nail these high priority standards. And so, secondly, we did a lot of talking here at the table. What are some things pre-work that you could do independently before you walk in the door? That
Know
might-
which TEKs
Yeah.
are prioritized.
Okay, so that means you have to, know which TEKs are your highest priority TEKs, which might be some front-end work, which I've already outlined, literally all the supporting standards and readiness standards tied to the 2nd grade TEKs for you guys, and I'll leave that with Katie, so that'll be something that she can, you guys can work with. What else is important? So identify those. What else is important that you guys do before you walk in the door? So the majority of your time can be everybody walking out with 3 strategies per team.
Going back to the questions where we had like lack of mastery, and like diagnosing those conceptual errors or causes.
So all of that matching up what the actual conceptual issue can all be done away from the table. Then that way, when you come together for 50 minutes, you can leverage off the support of one another's brain power to come up with the strategies to reteach it, but do all the analyzing on your own behind closed doors. You don't need one another for that. You can do that on your own, and after you get used to it, it'll take you 45 minutes to do it, max. Well, anything else? What are the materials that you need in front of you?
The test itself.
The test itself,
The
a hard
demo.
copy, a hard copy. So every meeting, you should have a hard copy of the test you're talking about. What else?
The data.
The right kind of reports that show what the students answered and that tied to the specific standard. What else? A template to capture this
Yeah.
information. You can walk in this door without one reteach plan done and be okay. Because do you see how much we were able to talk through, even 2 or 3 plans walking out the door? And I'm no expert in 2nd grade math, but I got a pretty good idea if I could just ask you guys questions. And then did you notice how I started to try to scaffold and ask specific questions to really kind of gear you into, okay, let's actually look at the particular question so that you're looking at it with one another in here. And then leverage off of one another. If Kelsey's class didn't master something, but your class did, you got to figure out what Tarnisha did in her classroom and really pick up on those strategies. Any questions or feedback from me? I'd like to take about 10 more seconds for each of you to go around on what was most valuable and what could be most improved.
Just the idea of aligning our prioritized TEKS to the TEKS they will need in 3rd grade. I think that list is going to be incredibly helpful.
I second that. I think that's a very good resource for us to
Yeah.
have. To know how we can best support our kids for their future, instead of just for passing 2nd grade, but for being successful in their life.
Right, I agree with that too.
Okay.
And then also data period, this has been one of my biggest struggles this year, and I appreciate you taking the time out to do this. It really was a good eye opener.
What can be most improved?
Oh gosh. Like this data meeting or our data meetings?
This data meeting, this
Oh,
one we just
gosh.
did. What would help you most?
It's no reflection time.
Yeah.
So let's all capture by the end of today. Can you get that to Katie? Because
Yeah.
Katie will be the one, and you guys ultimately leading these data meetings. So she'll need to know, and I'll need the feedback as well because I'll tell you a little secret once Lydia's off. So I was a principal at Peak for 7 years, and the senior director, managing director over at Peak. And then I moved over to Teaching Trust and followed Paul Bambrick around for a year watching North Star Schools. It's the first data meeting that I've ever done with all my new information. And so I told Katie, she's like, oh, I can't wait for you. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. It's my first one I've ever done with all this new way of doing it because I did not lead them like this. So I will really need that feedback so that I can continue to help our folks before I just tell them how to do it and don't walk the talk. So. All right, well, I know you need 2 minutes to make a coffee or use the restroom, so